The moon cast its sickly glow over Skinwalker Ranch, like a diseased eye staring down at the barren wasteland. The wind whispered secrets through the fields, its mournful sighs weaving a sense of dread that clung to Chris's team like a shroud. They'd arrived just before sundown, armed with cameras, audio recorders, and a reckless curiosity that bordered on hubris. "Let's get set up," Chris said, his voice laced with a mix of excitement and trepidation as he gestured toward the abandoned farmhouse that would serve as their base for the night. Julie, Mark, Zoe, and Nathan exchanged uneasy glances. They were seasoned investigators, but this place felt different. It felt alive. As they spread out to set up cameras, Nathan stood still, his eyes closed, his senses tuning into the energies that pulsed through the land. "This place is rotten," Nathan muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Something's watching us, waiting for us to make a wrong move." Chris shot him a wary glance. "That's why we're here, to uncover its secrets." 7:45 p.m. night descended like a blanket of darkness, suffocating the landscape. The team huddled inside the farmhouse, monitoring the camera feeds as the wind howled around them like a chorus of the damned. Julie's eyes locked onto a figure on the screen, tall, humanoid, but twisted, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. "Look at this," she whispered, her finger trembling on the screen. Chris grabbed his radio, his voice tight with anticipation. "Mark, Zoe, check out the barn. We've got something on camera." Mark and Zoe exchanged a hesitant glance, but Chris's urgency propelled them into the night. The air grew colder, heavy with an acrid smell that seared their lungs. "What's that stench?" Zoe whispered, shining her flashlight toward the barn. Mark's face twisted in disgust. "I don't know, but it's not natural." A crash echoed from inside the barn, making them freeze. "Did you hear that?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zoe nodded, her grip on the flashlight tightening. "Let's get out of here. This feels wrong." But as they turned to leave, the barn door creaked open, revealing a void that seemed to swallow the light. A low, guttural growl emanated from within, making the hairs on their necks stand on end. "Run!" Zoe screamed, grabbing Mark's arm. They sprinted back toward the farmhouse, the sound of footsteps, heavy, relentless, pounding behind them. 8:15 p.m. back at the farmhouse. Chris and Julie watched in horror as Mark and Zoe fled for their lives, their figures flickering on the camera feeds like ghosts. "What's happening?" Chris shouted into the radio. Mark's panicked breathing filled the speaker. "Something's chasing us. It's not human." The radio crackled with static, and then Chris's own voice spoke back, calm and collected, but distorted. "Come outside. Everything is fine. We're safe." Chris stared at the radio, his heart racing. He hadn't spoken. "Who's on the radio?" Julie asked, her face ashen. The voice repeated, louder, more insistent. "Come outside, let me in." Chris dropped the radio, his mind reeling. 8:30 p.m. Mark and Zoe burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. They were out of breath, eyes wild with terror. "What happened?" Julie asked, rushing to their side. "Something's out there," Zoe panted. "It was chasing us." Nathan's voice was barely audible, but laced with conviction. "They're Skinwalkers. They've been watching us since we arrived. They can take on any form, even ours." The lights flickered and the temperature plummeted. Scratching sounds echoed from the roof, as if something was clawing its way across the building. "They're here," Nathan whispered. 9 p.m. The power died, plunging the farmhouse into darkness. The only light came from Julie's trembling flashlight beam. Mark approached the window, his heart in his throat. 3 figures stood beyond the fence line, their faces blank, featureless. One raised its hand, waving with an unspoken menace. "Chris, you need to see this," Mark whispered. Chris joined him, his gut twisting with fear. "What are they?" Nathan's voice trembled. "They're Skinwalkers. They're taunting us." The door rattled violently, the wood groaning under the pressure. "We're not leaving," Chris said, trying to sound braver than he felt. 10:15 p.m. The pounding stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. The group huddled together, listening for any sign of movement outside. But the silence was worse. It was as if the darkness itself was watching them. "Why did they stop?" Zoe whispered. Before anyone could answer, the radio crackled to life again. Mark's voice spoke, calm and collected. "Guys, it's Mark. I'm outside. Let me in." Mark stared at the radio, his face pale. "What the hell?" The voice repeated, more insistent this time. "Let me in. I'm outside." "We're all inside," Chris said, his eyes scanning the room. "It's not Mark." The door creaked open a few inches, the wood groaning under the pressure. Something was trying to push its way in. Chris grabbed the crowbar, ready to defend the group. But when the door swung fully open, there was nothing there. Just the cold night air and an empty porch. Julie's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment they saw it, standing at the edge of the property. A tall figure, its skin stretched tight over its bones, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "It's watching us," Julie whispered. 11:30 p.m. The hours dragged on, and the team's nerves were frayed. Every creak, every gust of wind set their hearts racing. Chris kept watch near the window, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I see something," he whispered. They peered out into the night. The figures stood at the edge of the fence, more of them now, their heads tilted as if watching, waiting. "We need to get out of here," Zoe said, her voice shaking. "We can't leave," Chris countered. "If we run, we're done for." But as they argued, a soft voice echoed from the doorway. It was Zoe's voice, calm and reassuring. "It's okay," the voice said. "We're safe now. You can come outside." Zoe's blood ran cold. That's me." Julie raised the flare gun again, her hands trembling. "What do we do?" "They're trying to break us," Nathan said. "They're trying to make us doubt ourselves." 12 a.m. The front door burst open and something lunged inside. Chris swung the crowbar, but it went straight through the air. Whatever it was had already vanished into the darkness. The lights flickered back on for just a moment, revealing the figure standing in the corner of the room. It looked like Nathan, but its eyes were black, and its skin was pulled tight over its face. "That's not him," Mark said, backing away. The figure smiled, its teeth sharp and jagged. "You can't leave," it said in Nathan's voice. "You're already ours." Julie fired the flare gun, and the room filled with blinding light. The figure screeched, its form flickering like a glitch in reality before vanishing. But as the light faded, the whispers returned, louder this time. Outside, the figures began to move, slowly advancing toward the house. "We need to go," Chris said, his voice filled with desperation. "We can't stay here." 1 a.m. The team ran through the night, the wind howling in their ears as they fled from the house. Behind them, the figures followed, their laughter echoing through the darkness. They reached the van and piled in, Chris fumbling with the keys as he tried to start the engine. But no matter how many times he turned the key, the van wouldn't start. "We're trapped," Julie whispered. From the darkness, the figures emerged, tall, thin, their eyes glowing in the night. They circled the van, their voices a low, mocking hum. "You can't leave," they whispered in unison. The last thing the team saw was their own reflections in the glass, smiling back at them with empty black eyes. And then, everything went black. The next morning, authorities found the van abandoned on the outskirts of Skinwalker Ranch. The engine was still running, the headlights burning bright, but Chris, Julie, Mark, Zoe, and Nathan were never seen again. Some say that on certain nights, when the moon hangs low over Skinwalker Ranch, you can still hear their screams, echoing through the darkness. Others claim to have seen the team's reflections in the windows of the abandoned farmhouse, forever trapped in a nightmare from which they cannot awaken.